Welcome to the Boston Public Library's Local History Lecture Series. As part of our program, we want to read the following statement to bring attention to the land which we use for our building and events. We acknowledge that the Boston Public Library's Central Library stands on land that was once a water-based ecosystem, providing sustenance for the indigenous Massachusetts people, and is a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. We are committed to land acknowledgements for all locations at which we operate. We reaffirm this commitment to set the context for our planning, deliberations, and public engagement, which will take place from the spirit of welcome and respect, found in our motto, Free to All. Tonight, we are very pleased to present a talk called We Are the Land, the Power of Place in Indigenous Life, in conjunction with the Partnership of Historic Bostons. Dr. Lori Rogers Stokes, an independent scholar and trustee of the Partnership of Historic Bostons, will introduce our speaker tonight. This program is being recorded. Questions will be taken at the end of the program. Thanks for coming and enjoy the talk.
Thanks, Diane, and thank you to everyone who's come here tonight to join with us here. I am very pleased and proud to be representing the Partnership of Historic Bostons at the start of our fall series on the power of place, an Indigenous view of land, place, and belonging in early New England and today. It is a first for our organization, and it could not have happened, this entire series, with many events, speakers, and field trips that are upcoming that you can learn about at the flyer that's out at our registration table. Make sure you get one. We're going down to the Tamaquag Museum this Saturday in Exeter, Rhode Island. And none of it could have happened without the hard work of the PHB and the guidance and support and generosity of spirit of many Indigenous people. And I will introduce one of them tonight, and that is our speaker, Lance Young Eagle Wolf. He is the Chief Sachem of the Nemasket Tribal Nation and chairman of the Nemasket Tribal Council. And he is a 10th generation great-grandson of the Sanksqua of Nemasket, Amy, the daughter of the Chief Sachem Usamiquin Massasoit, who was father of Wamusutta Alexander and Metacom King Philip. This family genealogy was authenticated by the renowned Wampanoag historian and genealogist Russell Gardner, Great Moose. Lance is a marketing executive in the high-tech industry and previously served as the Director of Human Potential Development for the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation. He is currently an advisor to the Partnership of Historic Bostons and a certified facilitator for the Strengthening Indigenous Families program. He holds a BA from Middlebury College and is also a graduate of the Center for Creative Leadership and the Byron Katie School of the Work. Please welcome me, please join me in welcoming Lance Young Eagle Wolf.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Laurie. Wow, I don't know that I could have memorized that, and I think I wrote most of that, so kudos to you. And thank you all for coming. We say Uno Teo, which means may peace be in your hearts. It's a greeting. Another greeting that we often say is Akwene, which means peace. But so I wish peace to your hearts, and so do my ancestors who stand here with me today. Lori went over this, but I did want to give a nod both to the Boston Public Library for this series and also to the Partnership of Historic Bostons for taking a brave move in a fall series that is focused on Indigenous life in New England, from lectures that are in person to the walking tour, which if any of you have the time on Saturday to go down and see Lawrence Spears and Silver Moon, to get an understanding of some of the conversation I'm going to talk about, to actually see the landscape and to see the place and to understand that a lot of the things that we pass by every day are part of this extraordinary Indigenous history that is New England. I also want to point out that Dr. Jeremy Bangs, who is a very close friend of mine, who used to be curator of the Plymouth Museum, will be online with us in early October to talk about Indian deeds, which he has written 10 or 12 books on and knows the story of the land probably better than most non-Indigenous people know. You can get all that on their website and register there. I did want to make a statement about land acknowledgement, and I thank Diane and the Boston Public Library for acknowledging the land. But the land, we have a statement that we say, As nutan yunean, which means we are still here. We have not disappeared. This is still our place. So one of the things that the library has done is, in their call to action, has invited people like me to come and take action to speak to you about Indigenous people from an Indigenous voice. My ask of you is that you keep the wording about us in the present. We are here. We are still here. This is still, we don't want to take this library back and tear it down and put wigwams up. We realize that that's not going to happen, but this is still our place. This is still the home of the Massachusetts Ninimissinuk. This is still a land that inherently belonged to the people who were here 20,000 years before the Europeans even knew this existed or even they existed. So do something, take an action, help us fight mascots, help us get rid of disempowering symbols, which we've done with taking down the flag of the State House showing the disempowering image of a Native American with the sword over its head. Learn about a tribe. I invite you, I am the chief of the Nemasket tribe, one of the 3 head tribes of first contact. The Nemasket, the Pocasset, and the Pokanoket were the tribes that the Pilgrims met in 1621, and it was the Shawmut Indians, or the Massachusetts nations, that the Puritans met when they came here in 1630. Learn a little bit more about us, or participate in some activity that we do. One of the activities that I'd invite you to participate in, where you get a real understanding of Indigenous people, is to come to a powwow. Powwows are normally open to the public. You are asked to come. You can understand more about our understanding of the land, what it means to be in a sacred circle, what it means to dance, what it means to be together. And we invite you into that. And in that invitation, we are hearkening back to the time when the Pilgrims and the Puritans landed here, and we invited them into our relationship, to be in relationship with us, to be part of what we were. Now, obviously, we know that didn't happen that way, but you can join us. We say to dance is to pray is to heal is to give is to live, and to live is to belong. And when we mean belong, you belong to the land, you belong to the place. As the drummers drum, the sound goes through the earth and up into the feet of the dancers, and the dancers start moving in unison. And we call ourselves from the east into the sacred circle. We always enter the circle from the east. This is called Grand Procession, in which all of the tribes of all the nations, and this is the Mashantucket Pequot Grand Procession, hundreds and hundreds of Indigenous people from all over the continent, from Canada, from North America, from South America, come in this Thanksgiving. So powwow is a Narragansett term, which means medicine or medicine man. And this is the time of year when we thank the earth, when we thank the gods, when we thank the spirits for the bounty that we've been given, and we thank the tribes. We bring our relationships back together, that we relate to each other. It's more than just looking the way that we do. And the 2 things I would ask you if you do that, and I please invite you in, this is not a costume. It is called regalia. It is very sacred to us. Feathers never touch the ground. When we put these regalia on, we become the spirit of that regalia. This is deer. People wear different animals, different birds. They become those spirits because in some ways we didn't recognize the difference between where a human being ended and an animal began. They were one and the same. This is the idea that everything in place was part of that place. The cultural area that we're talking about, that I'm going to talk to you about, because I can't talk to you about other places, but I can certainly talk to you about the Northeast cultural area, which is this area. And there were two tribal groups that were in that, the Algonquian tribes and the Iroquois. The Iroquois were sort of nestled in between the Algonquian speaking, which means that all of the shaded grayish blue area were tribes that had similar dialogue. So the Abenaki, the Aquinnah, the Narragansett, the Pequots, so forth and so on, all had a similar language dialect that they spoke. And then you had the 5 nations of the Iroquois in between them. We called it the Nissamackinac, which was the word for land. This is our land. And the people who lived on that land were called the Ninimissinuk. So I am the Nemasket Ninimissinuk, and in that statement, what that means is, I am of the people of the Heron. This land here is the land of the people of the Heron. The Massachusetts Ninimissinuk are the people of many hills. As you all may know, when the Pilgrims or the Puritans first got here, there were many, many hills, and they have that great statement about a shining city on the hill, and they went to level all but one hill, which we call Beacon Hill, and as Diane mentioned, this particular building was in an estuary. This was water. So the idea that the land that the people belonged to and the people of the land was inseparable. They didn't see a difference between them and the land. They didn't see a difference between the land and them. There's a statement that Lisa Brooks makes in her extraordinary book called Our Beloved Kin, which is a recasting of King Philip's War, a retelling of King Philip's War from an indigenous point of view, which has never, ever been done, ever. This is the first time someone, by the way, she's Abenaki descent, took the position of what was this for the Native Americans? What was this place for them, and what were they? What was all of this? So in that, she talks about this idea of belonging, about being part of the land, about this landscape that included everything in it, everything on it, as inseparable, people inseparable from their land. Let me just give you a little bit of a creation story, and then this might help you understand a little bit about this idea when I say that there's this idea that we needed to balance the land out. Most indigenous tribes have a creation story. Some of them are different. Many of them talk about this idea that North America is a turtle. And if you look way up there and then above Maine, Nova Scotia, you can almost see an eye and a mouth, and this is the body of the turtle. So Turtle Island is what we normally call this area. So when you hear indigenous people talking about the place they come from, they talk about this place called Turtle Island. The land was created because most of it was water, and all of the animals helped to bring the earth up in some form or another and place it on the back of a turtle. The land was put on the back of a turtle so that trees could grow and flowers could grow and humans could live with the understanding that we would live in balance and in reciprocal relationships with nature, that we were a part of that, that we were not separate from that, but that we were a part of it, and we had to maintain that balance, because if the whole entire thing is on the back of a turtle and we tip the balance, then we end up in the upside down, and anyone who's seen Stranger Things knows that that's not a good place to be. Unfortunately, I think we have ended in the upside down. Hence, you might see in the landscapes, and this is in New England, an effigy to a turtle. This is a turtle. So, sometimes when you're driving through the fields and so forth and you see these stone things, you don't know what they are. Indigenous people had extraordinary monuments and so forth to animals, to turtles, to serpentines and everything. I believe that this is in Maine, but this is actually a homage to the idea that we are on Turtle Island. This is a great story because it sets this idea of a European. In Casco, the Queen of Coats, which is Casco today, who was in the Wabanaki territory, was entertaining Christopher Levitt, who was an English explorer. And Lisa Brooks goes into detail in the beginning of her book describing this idea of these groups of indigenous people coming together who belonged to this place because of inheritance and hereditary ties that reach back through time, but also people who were invited in to belong to this place. So the idea that even though you may not be from Turtle Island, you could be invited to be a part of Turtle Island if you were willing to be a part of these reciprocal and mutual relationships of understanding with everything that was in the environment that you were in. That included the trees and the birds and the animals and the plants and the water especially. But this belonging could be cultivated, which we invited every explorer, every European, every colonist to become a part of our network. Because Levitt wasn't the first time that we saw somebody at the rodeo. People have been coming to Turtle Island, allegedly since 1000 AD, and many of you may or may not know this, but there is a statue of Leek Erikson at the end of the Commonwealth Mall, over there by Fenway Park. Now, we're not really sure if he actually ever got this far down, but we do know that Leif and his brother did explore at least into the Canadian Maritimes. But there were many people who had come here. Miguel de Cote-Real came and met with the Picassets and lived among the Picassets, was never seen again by any Europeans. He actually has an inscription on Dighton Rock that says, "By the grace of God, the leader of the Indians." That's a little bit delusional of him because he wouldn't have been the leader of the Indians, but they would have brought him in and they would have made him a part of that. He became a part of the Picasset tribe. He became integral to the Picasset people. So if any of you have ever seen this, Dighton Rock is in Beverly, Massachusetts, which has all these extraordinary inscriptions on it, petroglyphs and writings from certain people who have come from Europe. The point of this is that people had been coming here for a long time. Some of them went back to Europe. Some of them didn't. Some of them stayed. This is before the time of the Pilgrims or the Puritans. And all of those who stayed were subsumed within the tribes that became part of those tribes, not separate from those tribes. But let's talk a little bit about pre-contact indigenous life. And the three words that I love to use, and you'll see this over and over again in writings, is this idea of balance. Everything was balanced. Remember, we've got the back of a turtle. Everything about life had to be balanced. Reciprocity. I did not take something from Lori without giving something of equal value back to her because that would tip the balance. So I did not take something from nature without giving something back to nature, because that would upset the balance. That was clearly understood. And then respect. We didn't go out and shoot 50,000 duck because we could shoot 50,000 duck, because we respected that the spirit that animated the duck was equal to the spirit that animated the human being. And it was disrespectful to take something if you didn't need it. Last big point here is little to no disease or illness. This is something that as the Europeans came, whole tribes were wiped out because they had no immunity to something like the common cold. They also had no venereal diseases or any other type of diseases that you might get from animal or livestock. So life was pretty peaceful and easy. Just a note on this idea of reciprocity and balance, because we talk a lot about it. It was required. This was your ticket to be part of a group, to be part of a tribe, to be part of a culture. It was required of you to understand reciprocity in the entire balance of the world. And everything in the world was predicated on this balance and this reciprocity. This is a good thing. Lori did a presentation a few weeks ago at History Camp about parallel universes. And one of the things she talks about is that tribes understood that even their population, even their living conditions had to fit within this balance. So they knew that maybe they had to limit the number of children that could be born. They knew that they had to do certain things to make sure that they didn't tip the balance and that everything depended on that balance working in the place that you were. That also meant a kinship. Kinship means, you might hear many times Native Americans say, my brother the eagle, the Wamsikook, my sister the swan, sister brother, like you know, people look at it and they go, what? But there was this idea that you were kin with them. Again, the spirit that animated you also animated the tree. It also animated those things. And the most important thing was to uphold the sanctity of life, that life was the most important thing. Kathleen Bragdon says in her book about Native Americans before, up to 1600, that they so held to this idea of the sanctity of life that if I did something egregious, murdered or injured somebody in another family, my family would pay for that, and it might be with my life that they would pay for that. That idea that life was so precious and so sacred, which is a counter conversation to the idea that we were savage people who killed people. Because that's not true. Life was so important and so precious to them, and that was the main thing. When we took hostages, or we took people in war, we took them to ransom them back to their tribes, because we realized the value of life. We didn't take them to kill them. We were taught to do that. So life was extraordinarily important, and that the power of this kinship was that you had to, in all cases, uphold and preserve ecological integrity. And one of those places that we see that the most is with water. You know, we see that with Standing Rock, and why we all rose up with Standing Rock, because water is life. Water is the lifeblood of everything on the planet. To Indigenous people, water was everything. And I would say, if you speak to tribal elders today, they'll tell you that water is the next war. Fresh, clean water is the next thing that we will war about. Look at what has happened just this year, this summer, in our own country, with people not having access to water. So this idea that one of the things we had to preserve the most was water, the lifeblood of all things. And we see that in our spiritual practices. If you come to powwow, you'll see that there are certain sacred things that we do around water, that we do around land and so forth, as part of the way of affirming to the earth, affirming to the world that we recognize that our responsibility is to uphold these tenets. Everything was sacred. No distinction, no rigid distinction between where the Wamsikook began and I ended. And here's another thing. It was egregious for my ancestors to think that you would put an animal in a cage, or that you would fence the spirit that animated the moose into a corral. That was an egregious offense, because interestingly enough, think about that, what you did to that would eventually happen to you. There were no domesticated animals in North America, zero, none. There were no cows, there were no sheep, there were no pigs, there were none of those things that were brought up, there was none of that. The only animal that was domesticated was the mukkashim, the wolf. And my ancestors say, the mukkashim chose us. We did not domesticate the mukkashim, which became the dog 16,000 years ago. They chose us. Their spirit decided on us. They were never caged in. They were never put in a dog house or a wolf house and locked in. They were never put in a house into your wigwam or to your wetu or whatever when you went, fishing. They lived outside, and they could leave anytime they wanted to, because the spirit that animated them had to be free. So this idea of hunting and harvesting, the ritual to hunting was, you had to wait for permission from the spirits that animated the deer to take the life of the deer. You didn't just go out and say, hey, come on, Joe and Bob, we're going to go out, we're going to hunt, we're going to kill 10 deer, and we only need one of them, we're going to leave the others there to die. You had to ask permission, and many, many times, the hunters the clothes that they would wear, they would either paint symbols, or hieroglyphs or petroglyphs of the animals, or they would dress with the antlers or so forth of them to get to the point where they were given permission. And that permission meant you used all of the animal. You didn't throw any of it away. You didn't get rid of it. I'm wearing on my regalia, these are deer hooves, right? As part of noise making. Everything was used. My wampum here that my brother makes is from quahog shells. We ate the quahog shells. We also used them for spoons, but then we made elaborate jewelry out of those things in wampum belts. Nothing went to waste. I always say to the people and Sid knows this, from the Partnership of Historic Boston, I challenge you to find a Native American dump. I'll stay here all day until you find one, and you never, ever will. Lori Rogers did a presentation about, hunting, and they're out and they're just shooting in the field, and they're shooting ducks and geese and just shooting and shooting and shooting, just to say that they shot them. That was an affront to the spirit. It was an affront to the place that you were in, because if you took something that you didn't need, you've upset the balance, and that would come back at you, and maybe it's not replaced. And so if that balance is upset, that ultimately would come back to you. That ultimately would be on you. And everyone mattered. Everyone had a job that related to a part of the earth or the place that you were. An interesting thing is this: women were not recognized as property. They were not put in the kitchen. They were not hidden, so that they could not be seen. And many times they had leadership roles, although most southern New England tribes were patriarchal. There were many of them that had leaders that were females as well. So we mentioned Weetamo. We mentioned my ancestor Amy. Both of those two were my ancestors. They were female. They were in charge. They were part of that. But they all had a set of duties that were not necessarily rigid. Men also helped with the fields and the planting and the corn and so forth. But everybody had to do this idea of collaborative networks of mutually beneficial relationships. So there were no poor people. There were no homeless people. There were no people that went without. If your gift was you made clothing and my gift was I made weapons for hunting, it was an equal trade. Mine was not better than yours. Yours was not less than mine. They were equal. And by the way, this hierarchy idea that we had sachems or we had chiefs didn't mean that they were different, better. Not like King Charles and, with $600 million. First of all, we didn't have any money, so you got to start there. There was no money in indigenous world. No money. Part of the problem is this idea of this accumulation of things because you can buy them. But there was no sense that the sachem was better. The sachem was responsible for making sure that the tribe and the tribes around them, and in fact the regions, had what they needed to survive. So I don't want to say that there wasn't land treaties or that there wasn't this idea that we had relationships around land and that people could use land, because there were land treaties, but this is the difference. Indigenous people never believed that they owned the land. You cannot own your mother. You belong to her. You belong to this place, but you do not own her. But you can, and they did many times, have treaties where perhaps the Pecasset tribe, which was a sister tribe to my tribe, the Nemasket, didn't have access to herring. We know the herrings run all the time. You go down to Fall River, New Bedford, you'll see the herring even today, as they have run for thousands of years. The herrings run. But that's in Nemasket territory. That is not Pecasset. It's Nemasket, even though they're sister tribes. So there were treaties in which we worked out with each other. Yes, you can come and you can fish, and this is what you can take from here. You have the right to come on to our land. You have the right to use the land. Maybe it's for hunting, maybe it's for other purposes. Maybe you need to go through our land in the summertime and have summer housing on the coast because you need certain shellfish that you can't get if you're a nipmunk because you live in the place of fresh water. You don't live by the ocean, but you actually need wampum and you need shellfish. So the treaties were worked out. And those treaties were worked out on these elaborate wampum belts. Many people think that we've long lost the ability to read these belts, but these belts were actually treaties. They said which sachem, if this were, say, something I was trading with the Picassets, what they could do on the land, where they could do it, and how long they could do those things on the land. So, you know, land treaties and land sharing didn't mean that our tribes gave up their land. Distinction, because when the colonists, when the Puritans said, hey, Lance, we want this land over here because we want to set up our farm here. I thought, well, okay, you want to use it. And everything you get from there, you're going to bring it back to this interrelated group called the tribe that you are now part of, and you're going to share that with us. And we're going to give you something, too. But that's not what that was. The land treaties, and my people soon learned it wasn't quite what these land treaties were, meant that they had to quit their land altogether. That was a very different set of rules that were established, which created a lot of conflict. And then this last piece of it was this idea of a constant renewal and preservation. That part that I talked about, this idea of the place of peace, when all of the tribal leaders got together from all of the tribes in the area, and they renewed this relationship, not just with themselves, but with the earth, with the places that they were. They renewed their treaties. They renewed their words that they said with each other, because they knew that this relationship to each other and to the land and to everything was important to their long-term survival. Land wasn't always occupied, you know. Another mistake that was made when, you know, the Puritans came in, they said, oh my God, look at this. All this land over here in Cohasset. It's December now, and nobody's here. Must mean they're gone. Let's take it. Well, to the indigenous people, it meant, first of all, we've retreated to our winter homes, or the land needs to rest to recover. That's not why we're not on it. Or look at this. They've burned all of this land out. We could drive a Sherman tank through it. And what they were doing was cultivating the saplings and undergrowth so that the deer and other animals could come to eat it so that they could, again, what's the relationship I have to the deer? You make sure I have food, and I'll make sure that we give up some of us so you can survive. Animals were not always hunted. There were times when you hunted, when you took animals, and again, with permission. And the sea wasn't always harvest. And then lastly, we understood that life needed to recover and rest. And there were times when we would let the earth rest before we went back to it, before we took anything from it. Ultimately, this came up against what I call irreconcilable thought systems. Thought system of scarcity, which is the thought system that was brought here. Now, let me couch that. When you live in a world where you don't have everything that you need, where you have to pay homage to kings, where you don't necessarily have everything you want, you have a scarcity mentality. When you come to a land of great abundance, and it looks like, my God, they're not even using these trees. 500,000 beavers were executed in the first 10 years of the Puritans and the Pilgrims landing in New England. 500,000, almost wiped out the entire beaver population in New England. Scarcity, I want it all, I don't want you to have it, versus the thought system of indigenous people. This land is a part of us. This land is bountiful. This land has to be balanced. We have to keep that ecological balance with things. Those two thought systems ultimately created the situation that we are in today, one irreconcilable from the other. I'd like to leave you with a few final thoughts here. Philip Cash, Three Deer, is a Mashpee, Narragansett Indian, wrote this extraordinary piece called We Are Indigenous. And the us is purposely highlighted because that means all of us, because we are now all in this situation where the turtle is not balanced. the turtle is tipping over, and we will suffer for that if many of our indigenous women believe that they know, because women always know everything. You know, women. This is why women were the medicine people in our tribes. Women were leaders in certain things, but that they believe that as Earth is a female, that we can fix this. It's going to take time. It's going to be hard, but all of us have to do this together. And Philip wrote this extraordinary thing, which I'd like to have you hear.
My name is Philip Cash, a Tuckanish, 3 Deer, son of Earl Cash Jr., medicine man of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, and Little Flower of the Narragansett Indian tribe. First, I'd like to say thank you to Chief Lance for asking me to share these words today. I ask that you not listen to these words, but to hear them or feel them. We are Indigen us. Indigen us is a mentality, a way of life. We respect, we honor, we love. We are spiritual beings and we are warriors, many of us both. We do not fight for revenge, but for love and peace. We fight for what is right. We do not want our land back. We understand that it is not our land. Please understand that it is not yours either. We cannot own it. Mother Earth is a gift from the Creator. We honor her in all her beauty. We are no greater. No greater than the winged ones, the four-legged beings, water beings, anyone nor anything. We stand together. We have been standing for years. We will stand until our souls wear thin, until our feet grow roots deep into the soil. We stay true to our roots. We are the roots. We are our ancestors. They stand with us. Together we stand in solidarity. We stand for each other, each tribe, each band, one tribe, one vibe. Indigenous is a way of being. It's a state of mind, and it's a way of living. We stand hand to hand in unity, not just tribal unity, but community. Unity has no color, no gender. We stand for us, Indigenous. Thank you.
And with that, Weneteo, may peace be in your heart, and thank you for listening. I have a copy of that if any of you would like that. Philip has offered some of those. So I guess with that, Lori, we'll take questions. Thank you.
You're not going to be at the podium, right?
Nope. No.
We are going to take questions now, and the way it will work is if you can come to the aisle. Here's Diane, and there's Roxanne with a mic that you can use. If you feel unable to move to the aisle, just raise your hand and one of them can come to you. And you're going to ask your question. I'm sure you will ask it loud and clear, but I'm going to repeat it for the recording. So you will ask, I'll repeat it, and Lance will answer.
What can we do to get back to where we were?
That is a big question. What can we do to get back to where we were?
Even in small ways.
There's no going back. The way is shut. You know, yesterday is over. I think the better way of answering that is, what do we do from here? How do we take some of these rich, extraordinary things that, and let me say this, the people who came here had really good ideas as well, right? They did. We're not here to blame or accuse, as that last quote said. We're here to teach and to understand. But I think what we can do from here is we really have to commit to making a difference. The hour is very, very late, and in the catalog of this land of Indigenous people, there is a way to fix this. Look, we went through what many people call a mini ice age at about the time that the Puritans and the Pilgrims landed here, and many people died off from that, right? We know that now, that there was a worldwide thing. But somehow we survived, right? Somehow we survived. And we, Indigenous people, were almost wiped off the face of the earth from disease, from being pushed out of our homelands, but somehow we survived because we were true to certain things. And I think if we study, there's some great literature out there. You can read some of the stuff that, if you haven't read Lisa Brooks's Our Beloved Kin, which is a story of my 11th great-grandmother, Weetamo of the Picassets. You must read that to understand from, it's so scholarly done, but it's beautiful. It's deliciously gorgeous about how indigenous people were. For 400 years, we've been told one story about my people, right? For good, bad, worse. And it's mostly been that we were the bad ones, right? Like this land was, for whatever reason, but she tells this story about how we lived, how we cared for each other, how we cared for theirs, how important it was to be where we were. And I think there are lessons in there about how we treat each other and how we treat the earth. And on the larger scale, you know, governments are made of people, right? Change your mind about the reason that we do things is how you change the course that we're on. It takes individuals to do that because it's never going to happen in mass. It's going to happen because we do that individually. So I love your question, and I think the statement should be, what do we do from here? How can we take some of that and make this a better place? Not for us, right? For us too, but for all those 7 generations that are going to have to take this. And will they love us because we did the right thing, or will they curse us because we didn't act? Thank you.
So I was wondering if you could identify a couple of positive things that are moving towards a blended future, or a win-win, or however you want to call it. Are there some good things happening that we can celebrate?
The question is to identify some of the positive energy and movement, some of the good things that we may be moving toward. I think you mentioned that many women believe that we can make good progress.
I think that this gathering is one of those things, right? That people, I've done a number of Zoom presentations for the Partnership of Historic Bostons, and you know, if the Orange Line wasn't broken, I'm sure a lot more people would be here, but you know, but there have been hundreds of people on those presentations because I think people are saying, I want to make it, I'm starting to look at this differently. I've had school teachers say, can you come in and talk to us about how we can do better with the environment, with the world? I think that the United Nations Human Rights Commission, the UNDRIP group, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, is on a global basis looking at how we get back to a place of respect and love. And even with all this upheaval that we're going through right now, the elders tell us that this is the time of the Great Awakening, that we are all awakening to our individual responsibilities to that balance. So I think that you know, there's a lot of things in the women's movement. Native American women are doing an enormous amount about going out and teaching. We have the Narragansett Indian tribe who is doing things around subsistence farming and teaching how to farm with bringing back the plants and things that were indigenous to here, and doing those things. We're bringing back languages, we're bringing back culture in a way that we haven't. The Mashantucket Pequots are in the process of reviving not just the Pequot language, but many of the languages, and in those things are coded ways of changing things. So I think we're on the cusp of that, and people are starting to say, you know, we can't do this anymore, right? And I think we're just at the beginning of some of those tidal waves. But I think that when we get past this time of uncomfortableness, I think more will happen.
I recently read in National Geographic that some indigenous tribes are reclaiming the lands that their ancestors lived on, and regrowing the trees and restoring the ecosystems, especially in parts of Canada. Do you see any evidence of that happening in Massachusetts?
That question is about Indigenous efforts that are already taking place, particularly in Canada, to restore land by regrowing forest, protecting animals. Are there other examples that you know
I see, I think we could do better. I think that we could do better. I think the Mashpee are doing some great things, and the Aquinnah are doing things. One of the biggest problems with Massachusetts, and this is my opinion as the chief of the Nemasket, is this is the place of first contact. Not really, but it is the place of first contact, because you saw that slide, right? And we do not have a formal way of recognizing indigenous tribes. This place, where my ancestor, Ossamecan Massasoit, met the Pilgrims, and where the Shawnee Indians met Winslow and all of them, and saved them, we do not have a formal way of recognizing this liberal, wonderful place. We have to start there, and then we have to start saying, what can we do from there? My tribe has a great deal of land on the Watuppa. It's on the watershed. Guess what? We can't do anything with it, right? Because it's on the watershed. How can we go back there and work with the witch hazel, or bring echinacea back, or do things that you're mentioning, if we don't have access to that land, right? Encoded in the DNA is how we cultivate and care for that land. So I think some of the bigger tribes that have more power because they're federally recognized are doing certain things, and you can see Mashpee with reclaiming their lands as they've done. They've been on and off with either being federally recognized or not because of a certain president, but now they're back. So the Nipmunks are doing certain things, but we need the establishment to say we need to work with you so that we can do those restorations and that we can bring things back to a better place.
So I'm wondering if you're doing any programs with any people to teach them what they knew back then on how to make the clothes, how to dye the clothes, how to ... Like live off the land, be self-sufficient without money, because it's kind of a problem these days. There's a lot of poor people that have no income, that can't maintain their needs. So, I mean, we have a huge epidemic of drug addiction, probably because of that by itself, never mind any other factor.
What are the efforts that are being made, that can be made, to, I think, reestablish more indigenous ways of being that could help to mitigate poverty and other problems that we are all facing?
So that's a very good question. Andre Strongheart Bear of the Nipmunks is doing an extraordinary job of teaching those things, teaching how to tan your own hides, how to go out and hunt, how to plant the right types of plants. He's doing great work there with the Nipmunks. Rocky Johnson at the Narragansett tribe is doing a great deal with there, as are many of the people at the Mashantucket Pequot. If you come to, the Pequot has a whole cultural program. They have a lot of things, and a lot of those things are open to the public, but mostly open to indigenous tribes and not just their own tribe, right? Because it can't be just about me. It can't be just about what I think the Nemasket people need, because that is not in balance. That is out of balance with, and then the Pecassis or the Pokanokids or the Sakonets don't have, and I have something I should share with them. So we need to do more of that, and we need to have a way that we can reach out to people. And one of the ways that that's being done is trying to get into the schools, trying to get to school children, elementary kids and other kids, and showing them those things and teaching them that. But that's a goal, to have more of that done. If nothing more than to teach people how to live off of the land, right? If you ever Google Andre Strongheart Bear, he does extraordinary things with the land. He's in at the Wayside Inn right now, building a canoe. So, the traditional way that those canoes were built is we felled trees, big trees, and in the Nipmunk territory they have enormous forests, right? So you fall a tree, you bring it in, and you burn it out. That's how we made our canoes. We didn't have chisels, right? You burn the canoe out. So he is working with a bunch of Nipmunks and other students in conjunction with the Wayside Inn, and they're showing how we built these canoes, how we created those canoes, how we fished, how we hunted, and so forth. And that's a bright spark here. I wanted to make sure that we're not running over, because I know Diane says that certain hour, the alarms go off, the bells go off, they shut us in here, and we're done?
We're good.
Okay.
We still have we have about 20 minutes.
Okay.
Someone down front here at
Down
Roxanne?
the front.
Thanks very much for being here and sharing what you shared. My name is Ella, and I'm a city planner, and I actually work for the city, although not representing them today. And I'm really interested in relationship to land, which often conjures like thoughts of rural places, but also relationship to place. And here we are in this urban area of Boston. And I wonder, and there's, you know, I really appreciate what you said, that we can't go back. And in fact, if we all went back to living off of the land and in the woods, there would be huge ecological impact and climate impact. So given where we are now, do you have, this is kind of a tough question, but are there examples that you've witnessed or been part of a sacred approach to planning for our communities and building the places we need to live and work and play in a relationship of respect and a relationship of that place being Mother Earth?
Question is, if we are in an urban setting, what are the ways that we can respectfully use an indigenous approach to respectfully live on land that's been urbanized and to treat it with respect?
I would, I don't know if you've looked at any of the stuff that, and I'll take this to my alma mater, Middlebury College, which, first of all, they're the only college on the East Coast that teaches an indigenous language. They have a full minor, I believe, in Abenaki. They're teaching that. But they've made a decision, and the college may not be the perfect example because it's not in the middle of the city, but to return the land of Middlebury College to the land. So they're growing wildflowers, and you know they're looking at how making buildings that are made out of wood and not out of foreign substances that are not natural to the environment. It's amazing how wood changes your sense of your beingness, right? It lowers your blood pressure, it's more economical and so forth. But they're looking at that, and then they have a program where they can bring this sort of this idea of how you rescape places to other places to do that. And I think that that's some of the stuff in the city that we could do. Why aren't we growing? Why aren't we allowing certain, you know, I think along all of, like when you drive down any of the boulevards and you have all those weeds there, why are we not putting wildflowers in there to grow in there? Why isn't yarrow growing in there? Why aren't things that have a more of a beneficial relationship to the environment in those particular places? And then when we're building things, especially when we're building things, are we taking into consideration water? You know, like how does water come and go in here? What about all this rainwater? Now we know all this rainwater is full of all these toxins. We've always known that, but we're just admitting it now, right? So how do we keep those in mind? And then how do we build in situations where if we know, and we do know in many places, that this was a ceremonial site or a sacred site for indigenous people, how do we respect that? Why are there no monuments to indigenous sites in Boston? So, none of this is going to be easy. Like, it's so difficult because we've gotten ourselves so far down a path. But at some point, we have to stop and we have to say, again, what can we do right now from here? And are we willing? Because the issue is not can we. The issue is will we. Like, why aren't we all, I mean, I know that maybe electric cars isn't the answer because you still have the issue of the power plants, blah, blah, blah. But why have we not forced us as human beings to do things that are more, wind power, solar power, water? Why are we not doing that now? Like, there's a glacier the size of Florida that's about ready to fall off of the shelf, and that could send 16 sea levels rising 16 feet. Now I ask you, as someone who works in the city of Boston, what's that going to do to our city when this Back Bay is called the Back Bay because it was water, and 16 feet of water come rushing at us? I don't know if I answered your question, but it's such a complex complex issue. And the other part of that I think we need to do is we need to invite, what I love about the mayor is I think she's been hunting for, someone to be, I think is an Indigenous liaison or something, where we need to invite the Punkapog, invite the Nipmunks, invite us in and say, work with us. Because you hold this hereditary history, this DNA about maybe how to be better. We never had permanent housing. We never, that seems like a crazy thing, but we never destroyed the landscape because we put buildings up that then when we took them down, we said, well, you can't build anything in there anymore because of the asbestos. So maybe we could invite the dialogue and really be genuine about wanting to have that conversation. And then we have to do the hard work. Right? I admit sometimes it's like, you have to do it. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation this evening. I wonder if maybe on a slightly more personal note, a lot of the aspects you've been talking about in terms of the revival of language, new Indigenous scholarship, and many of these positive trends that are giving greater expression to Indigenous peoples across the country and here in this region as well. Can you reflect back on growing up as an Indigenous person and just maybe say a few words about how has your own sense of identity as a Nemasket person, as an Indigenous person, changed in these last few decades?
Yeah.
Asking for personal reflections from Lance about his own experience growing up as an Indigenous person.
That's a difficult one because we hold, emotional scars from so much negativity. I'm multiracial. Obviously, I'm not just Indigenous. My mother is white. My father is Indigenous. He's Spanish. He also has black. But we have always identified with my grandfather's side of the family, which is in the Indigenous side, because of the extraordinary legacy back to Massasoit. There is no other family in the whole region that has an unbroken line to Massasoit. We have always known that, but I would never entertain a conversation about I'm Indigenous to people. That would not be the first thing that I would say to them when I was younger. I just wouldn't. It just seemed like there were so many things that we felt ashamed of and that, that we felt bad about that kept us from doing that, except for when we went to places like powwow, or we went to be with those people where we knew we were in communion with those people. And what my great-grandfather never let us forget was that history, who we were, and that we should be proud of those types of things. But it wasn't easy. As many of you people in this room know, we're just coming into that awakening where we're looking at black and brown and yellow and red people, and we're saying we have done them a disservice in the way that we have perceived them. And we need to rethink that. And so I think with this resurgence of all these social changes and we've reached this crux where so many things are happening in our world, that Indigenous people can stand up and they can say, this is who I am, and this is what I represent, and this is my power, and this is how I bring it into the world. But that wasn't always easy. It was very difficult. You get called, high yellow, there's all kinds of names you get called, so you try to keep away from those. Half-breeds, there's a lot of bad, names break your heart, and so you learn, and we've learned, and this is another part where we have this, Native people, black people, brown people, we're not mad, we're not angry, we're reserved because of what we have been through. So you see the world differently, right? But we don't do that anymore. We finally, and strong Indigenous women are standing up, and other people, and they're standing up and they're saying, we have got to fix this, we've got to make a difference. And so when you have a crescendo of people, when you have a group like the Partnership of Historic Boston, who historically did their presentations from the point of view of the Puritans, right? And the colonists, and are now saying, we can't do that anymore. Let's tell the other story too. Yeah, let's talk about the things that they did that were good and that were valuable, but that's not the story. So you see that and you feel, you know, 5 years ago, I would not have joined this group. I would not, as an advisor, I just wouldn't have done it. I just would not have seen it. But they've made this monumental shift to say that history isn't just about history. It's about looking at that and making a change so that we all together, Indigenous, can make a better future. And what can we learn from these Indigenous people and from the good people? You know, there were really good people. You know, Roger Williams did us an extraordinary job. He notated the language of the Narragansett. So we have a basis for all of the Algonquian languages in this area. So, you know, I mean, that has given us this resurgence in the sense that if we don't, and especially Indigenous women who say, we have to save this. Extraordinary. I hope that.
Hi.
Hi.
Given the some of the tragedies of assimilation from Indian to the European, like the native peoples, and when I didn't know any of this when I was a kid, but I grew up in upstate New York, Iroquois country, and I read a lot of the James Fenimore Cooper novels when I was young, and I thought when I was 5 or 6 years old, what do you want to be when you grow up? I said, I want to be an Indian. I want to go and live in the woods and just be like one of those people. And they said, no, that's not allowed anymore. And that, to me, that was a real tragedy to me, that like it didn't seem like it seemed unjust, and it still seems unjust. And I'm wondering, are there opportunities to assimilate the other way? I mean, could I become, could I just leave this white man's place behind and live out my childhood dream of like really doing it? I mean, is that even possible, or is it still against the law?
So the question is, given the amount of urbanization and population and the change in the world, is it possible to go back to, is it even legally allowed to live off the land wherever you may find undeveloped land? And is that part of the process?
Well, I think that it would be hard for everybody to do that, as the woman said here, that we can't just. But there isn't a tribe that wouldn't welcome you in to their mutually beneficial relationships of reciprocity and allow you to be part of what they were. I mean, you would never be, Nemasket, but that doesn't mean that you couldn't be part of that network. And, I have a house in northern New Hampshire in Endakina, which is the northern country of the Abenaki. Plenty of people live like that, right? Totally. I have electricity, I'll admit it. But there are people in and around Forest Lake, in and around Whitefield, in and around that mountain that live like the Indigenous people did. And they don't, and many of them are vegetarians. People don't understand that meat was not the basis of our diet, right? Corn was, beans, other things, shellfish, seafood, and so forth. So I think it's possible, and I don't think that, I don't know what if the law would stop you from doing it. I don't see how they could. But Indigenous people would welcome you in, and we would even teach you. My nephew would teach you how to tan hides. My cousins would teach you how to create wampum, if that's what you want, how to build, sustainable gardens. Because that's what we have to do. Because if I can't do it for you, it's not going to work for us.
I have a question to follow on to that, which is, if we accept your and the Indigenous invitation to attend powwows, to go down this Saturday to the Tamaquag Museum, to join with you, what can we give back to you to make that reciprocal? You can not call this a costume. You can ask any Indigenous person any question you want about what they're wearing or what they are doing, and they will graciously tell you. You can be respectful when the MC says, when we're doing something solemn, like we're honoring the veterans, or we're honoring our elders, or we're honoring the land, and they say, please do not take photographs of this. Don't take photographs. But the one thing that you can do for me, I would be overjoyed, is when we announce an intertribal, you are a tribe. Come and dance in the circle with us. Enter from the east. Feel the power of my ancestors. I don't care if you don't know how to dance the way I do. You can walk around the circle if you want to. But join that relationship, and then you become us.
right? You feel it, you hear that, the extraordinary drums as they reverberate through the ground and up through your feet. The drum is not just the drum, it's also the voice of the singers who are singing out to the eagles and to the spirits. Come and do that and see why we say the things we do. And I challenge any of you, and listen, intertribal means you don't have, and you do not have to dress in regalia. You probably don't have it, you know. If you do, good. But if you do, and you want to come in your regalia, come in your, if you have a ribbon shirt, whatever, just come and dance and be with us. That to me would be, I would welcome that. They're probably the biggest powwows, and you want to come to a big one because you want to get the sort of like the dizziness of being in that circle. The Mashantucket Pequots, the Narragansett powwows, the Shinnecock powwow in New York, the Mashpee powwow. Those are the ones you want to go to because then you'll see this moving circle of Indigenous people from everywhere, and you become part of that circle too. So that would be my request.
And where's the best place to learn about where and when these powwows are? Is it the tribal websites? Or?
So you can go, there's one site called wanderingbull.com, and he usually lists all of the powwows in the Northeast. So he'll give you the powwows that are in Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, all southern New England and so forth. Or you can just, if you want to Google, if you go to the Mashantucket or the Narragansett site or the Mashpee site, they'll list their powwows plus other powwows as well. Indian Country Today, ITC Today, is also another place to go. But come to that. It's the closest that you're going to experience about what I talked to you about today, about my ancestors, and you are all welcome. And if you see me, I will walk in and dance with you and into tribal anytime.
That may be it for our questions this evening. I'll wait one moment. If you have a question while I'm speaking, just raise your hand. But if we are drawing to a close of our time here together, remember to get a flyer. If you don't already have one, they're at the tables outside, and they talk about our other events and speakers. This Saturday, I'll say it again, we're going down to Exeter, Rhode Island to go to the Tamaquag Museum for a walking tour and a visit to the museum. That's going to be amazing. This is Narragansett people who we will be joining. And then we have three more talks coming up, and it is a range of different tribal nations, different focuses, all though about what it means to belong to the land, which is, of course, our theme this fall. So you can go to our website, which is Historic Bostons, that's plural, historicbostons.org. Grab this flyer. Go to any internet browser and just type in Partnership of Historic Bostons, and you will find this, and we will be so honored to have you join us. Also, you can come down here and pick up this Indigenous placard, which is what Lance had on screen, and the little card for Indigenous. I think everybody here, I've got mine, feels a little more Indigenous tonight. So please join me in thanking Lance once again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
What final words you would like to say?
The last thing I would say is when I say we are the land, you are the we that I'm talking about as well. So let's work together to be better, to give the land back to itself. Giving the land back to itself means you give it back to you because you are the land. So, Weneteyong, may peace be in your heart, and thank you.